22,000 claims. Army and Navy now say that many CRSC records are being reviewed after Soto. One date decides when the DFAS clock starts. We will separate the branch decision from the DFAS audit to find it.
The Supreme Court decided Soto on June 12, 2025. The narrow holding is that the CRSC statute displaces the Barring Act's settlement procedures and limits. In plain language, the 6-year Barring Act cap doesn't govern CRSC claims.
Then the service corrects every entitlement and every retiree gets
no giant check promise. That leap is exactly where a useful ruling turns into bad advice. Soto removes one legal limit. It doesn't prove a person's earliest eligibility date or combat-related conditions. It also doesn't prove the retired pay history or payment amount.
Implementation has two decision makers. The retiree service branch owns the CRSC entitlement record and effective date. DFAS receives the corrected record, reconstructs the retired pay account, and calculates whether retroactive compensation is due. So if someone remembers one sentence, let it be this: branch first, DFAS second. The branch corrects the entitlement record. DFAS does the pay audit. Neither step should be replaced with a dollar estimate from somebody else's case.
I still want to stress test that. The court said the cap doesn't apply. Why can't Marcus, a 62-year-old retired Army staff sergeant, simply count back to retirement and multiply his current CRSC payment by every month?
Because current monthly CRSC may not equal the historical monthly entitlement. VA ratings can change. Combat-related determinations can cover different conditions at different times. Retired pay and waiver data can change. The audit has to use the record for each period, and the service has to identify the earliest valid effective date under its corrected decision. The Supreme Court didn't award Marcus a number. It removed a legal bar that had limited how far a qualifying CRSC claim could reach.
Marcus pulls his old award letter from the file. That letter may show a date chosen under the old 6-year limit, but it is the branch's corrected letter, not his own arithmetic, that becomes the instruction to DFAS.
So the old letter is evidence of what happened, not a calculator.
Correct. Keep it. Compare it later. Don't treat it as the final answer once a review is underway. The practical question in July 2026 isn't whether Soto exists. It's what the Army and Navy review steps say about potentially affected records and what the retiree must or must not submit.
Which handoff date controls when the DFAS clock can sensibly start? We won't name it until the agencies are separated.
Good. Start with the branch that used the word automatic.
Coming up, Army's no action rule, plus the new condition exception that looks like the opposite instruction. Quick, honest ask while we are here. If this has been worth your time so far, hit like, then subscribe and ring the bell. I know everyone asks, but this one is free and it is how a small channel like this actually grows. Professor Duran joins us at the desk to separate Army's automatic Soto review from the issues that still require a filing.
Automatic. Army Human Resources Command actually published that word.
Yes, and that matters to anyone who is afraid that doing nothing means missing the review. For existing Army CRSC awardees, the Live Army page says no action is required.
The Army says it identified the applicable letters and will review more than 7,000 claims. That process is expected to take several months. The page doesn't promise every reviewed claim will produce additional money.
Look at the Army's own page. It pairs 3 facts: automatic review, more than 7,000 claims, and updated decision letters sent both to DFAS and to claimants.
What does automatic cover? Every possible problem in an Army CRSC.
Only the effective date correction. The published update says the Special Compensation Branch will update new effective dates. That's the Soto correction lane. If a retiree wants a new condition considered, Army says to submit Form 12E for reconsideration.
That distinction can save someone from 2 opposite mistakes. One mistake is flooding Army with a duplicate request for the automatic date review. The other is assuming the date review somehow adds a condition that was never part of the CRSC decision.
Wait, if Marcus has an old Army award and a newly rated combat-related condition, He may need to do nothing for Soto and still need Form 12E for the new condition?
Exactly. Two different questions, two different actions. Soto review asks whether the effective date on an existing CRSC record was limited by the Barring Act. Reconsideration asks Army to evaluate a condition or change not already resolved in that record.
Erica, this is like a school portal with 3 logins from the same district, same family, different tasks. Nobody is born knowing which government silence means wait and which means file. Here, wait for the automatic Soto review, but use the current reconsideration route for a genuinely new condition.
Where this analogy breaks is access. One government login doesn't root every CRSC issue. The official instructions do. That is bureaucracy's favorite trick. 2 quiet people, one correctly waiting and one accidentally doing nothing.
A fair joke, attached to a real rule. Army awardees don't need to request the effective date review. New conditions aren't swept into that review. Keep those sentences separate.
When Army finalizes a correction, it says the updated letter goes to the retiree and to DFAS. That means Marcus should watch the mailing address Army uses and preserve both versions of the letter when the new one arrives.
Can he call DFAS now and ask what the back pay will be?
He can ask general account questions, but DFAS can't compute a Soto correction it hasn't received. Army itself directs payment amount and timeline questions to DFAS, yet the useful audit begins after the corrected entitlement information reaches DFAS.
If Marcus also has a new condition, he separates that packet from the automatic review instead of stapling 2 problems together. One folder holds the old award and later correction. The other holds Form 12E and the evidence for the new condition.
I wanted one universal Soto form. Army's page says there isn't one for existing awardees.
And the next branch uses different words even though the records ultimately travel to the same pay agency. $15,000. That's the Navy's published count of claims under review, not a count of guaranteed payments. Explain this like I've never seen an entitlement record. What is Navy actually reviewing?
Navy says it will review all potentially impacted CRSC recipients and identify awards reduced by application of the Barring Act. Then it determines the appropriate effective date and modifies the decisional documents for affected members. The Navy page is unusually clear about the handoff package. It lists the original effective date, the corrected effective date, and the member's CRSC entitlement determinations as documentation sent to DFAS.
Why does DFAS need the original date if the corrected date replaces it?
Because a retroactive audit reconciles what was authorized and paid against what should have been authorized for the historical period. The 2 dates define the span, while the entitlement record tells DFAS what CRSC decisions apply inside that span.
So Navy doesn't put a sticky note on a file that says pay more. It sends a structured correction that DFAS can test against the retired pay account.
3 records: old date, new date, entitlement history. Then a 4th actor with a calculator. Bureaucracy has achieved a rule of 4.
And, mercifully, the 4th actor is the one legally positioned to calculate. Straight version: Navy corrects the decision record. DFAS computes and processes any retroactive CRSC due.
What does the retiree do today?
For this Navy Soto review, the official page says no immediate action is required. The Department of the Navy says eligible retirees will be notified. That statement covers this review. It isn't a blanket instruction for every future CRSC issue.
Suppose a Navy retiree moved twice since the old decision. Waiting is still correct, but an obsolete address can turn correct waiting into missed mail.
That's the practical edge. Verify current contact information through the proper official account channels. Preserve the old Navy decision and any later correspondence. Don't send sensitive records to an address copied from a video or comment thread.
And if the retiree has a separate new condition or reconsideration issue, they should follow the current Navy CRSC instructions for that issue. No immediate action belongs to the Soto records review described on the Soto page.
Good boundary. The Soto page says eligible retirees will be notified. That implementation notice doesn't suspend every claimant responsibility elsewhere in the program.
When a corrected Navy document arrives, the date on that document is the service's answer. Keep the envelope or electronic receipt, save the old document beside it, and note when DFAS receives or acknowledges the updated entitlement record.
Hold that acknowledgement. We need it when we build the audit clock.
First, one warning. The Army and Navy pages don't let us speak for every other service.
So we close this branch with a boundary. Navy's no action rule belongs to Navy's published Soto review. Professor Duran rejoins us to show why Army and Navy instructions cannot be generalized across every service.
2 public implementation notices don't create one all-service instruction. Army's automatic review language is Army's, Navy's 15,000 claim, and no immediate action language is Navy's, including Marine Corps records handled by the Department of the Navy.
But the Supreme Court ruling applies to CRSC. Why wouldn't every service run the same process?
The legal holding can be common while administration differs. Army's automatic review is one service process. The statute assigns the secretary concerned by service, and each service communicates its corrections to DFAS.
But uncertainty can sound like we forgot to research. We verified Navy's 15,000 claim review and no immediate action notice too. We can't turn Army or Navy instructions into an Air Force or Coast Guard promise.
Make it concrete. Air Force retiree, old CRSC award, 6-year limited date. What do?
They check the current Department of the Air Force CRSC source or contact the service CRSC office using official contact information. They ask whether a Soto review is automatic, whether a request is needed, and how corrected decisions will reach DFAS.
They shouldn't mail Army Form 12E to the Air Force. They shouldn't quote Navy's no action notice as if it binds another service. And they shouldn't send Social Security numbers or medical records to a contact copied from an unverified video description.
That last warning sounds obvious.
File the Army form. Wait, no, that's exactly the mistake. Use your service's current route. When money is involved, a familiar form number can feel safer than admitting the route is uncertain.
Search from the official DoD CRSC page to the service-specific source, or type the government domain yourself. Confirm that the page belongs to the service and that its Soto instructions are current before transmitting anything.
One boundary still worries me. What if your service page says nothing about Soto?
Then silence isn't permission to invent an automatic review. Ask the service CRSC office a bounded question in writing. Is my existing award being reviewed under Soto, and is any action required from me? Keep the response with the award file.
That written question is useful because it doesn't demand a dollar promise. It asks who owns the review and whether the retiree has a task. Those are answerable implementation questions.
I came in treating Soto applies, and this branch uses Army's process as the same statement. They're not.
Right. Common legal rule, service-owned entitlement record, DFAS-owned computation. That 3-part model survives even when the public instructions differ.
Before we get to the audit clock, hold this distinction. Its start event isn't the date most retirees see first.
The clock starts when the service finishes its review.
Not quite. A finished service review can produce a corrected letter for the retiree, but DFAS's published timing is measured after DFAS receives all the information needed for the retroactive computation.
Watch the handoff. The service finalizes the corrected effective date and entitlement record. The retiree gets a decision copy. The service transmits the correction to DFAS. Then DFAS can audit the historical pay account.
That is the 4-step chain I promised at the beginning. First comes service correction, then DFAS receipt. Manual retroactive computation leads to notice and any payment due.
60 to 90 days from the letter in my...
Not from your mailbox. DFAS says retroactive CRSC or CRDP computations may take 60 to 90 days after it receives all the information. The page also says additional research or computation can take more time. That phrase, "after all the information," protects people from starting the countdown too early. Your corrected letter can arrive before the service to DFAS data exchange is complete or visible in customer service systems, especially in complex cases that take longer.
What makes the audit hard? It sounds like subtraction.
Okay, 2 ways to answer that. A long record can include years of changing VA ratings and CRSC determinations. Retired pay amounts, waivers, and earlier payments can change too. Each month has to reconcile under the rules in force for that period.
DFAS itself calls retroactive computations significant research and manual calculations. Its priority can be to start current monthly payments first and calculate retroactive amounts afterward. That published workflow is another reason not to infer denial from silence during the audit.
Could DFAS decide the branch picked the wrong effective date?
Fenrir, picture a card catalog with 2 drawers. One drawer is entitlement. The service owns that decision. The other is computation. DFAS owns the audit explanation after a valid correction. Pulling the wrong drawer won't answer the dispute.
This is the opposite case handoff from the promise we just kept. When the service record is corrected but DFAS hasn't received all information, waiting on the audit may be appropriate. When DFAS has a completed audit but the service date itself is wrong, calling only DFAS won't repair the entitlement decision.
Different owner, different question.
Exactly. Ask the service whether the corrected record was transmitted. Ask DFAS whether the corrected entitlement was received and whether a retroactive audit is pending. Those questions locate the file without demanding an invented finish date.
And once the audit is active, let the calculator do the work. The number we held back is 60 to 90 days after all information arrives, not 60 to 90 days from the Supreme Court ruling, the service memo, or your mailbox.
That clock has earned its label. Now show me what Marcus writes down while he waits.
Marcus needs 5 lines, not a homemade back pay total. Now for the file audit a retiree can do without pretending to be the service or DFAS.
Line 1 is the original CRSC decision date and effective date. Line 2 is the service's current Soto review instruction. Automatic, no immediate action, or a verified service-specific response. Keep the source date with that note. Line 3 is the corrected decision date and corrected effective date when it arrives. Compare the condition list and entitlement language too. A corrected date shouldn't be assumed to add conditions that the branch never approved.
Line 4 is the check.
Line 4 is transmission status. When did the service say it sent the correction? When did DFAS say it had the information needed for the retroactive audit? Those dates explain which queue owns the weight. Line 5 is the DFAS result. Audit notice, account explanation, and any payment issued. If the amount differs from what you expected, ask for the computation before assuming the court ruling was ignored.
You built a money-shaped log with no dollars.
Fenrir, deliberately. The rows are administrative milestones. Publishing guest dollars would turn an individualized audit into a promise. The only honest total here is a complete record. Marcus also checks his mailing address, email, and retired pay contact information through official channels. That's not an application for relief. It's basic delivery hygiene while 2 agencies may send decisions or notices.
I know delivery hygiene sounds like one more chore, but a corrected letter sitting at an old address can create months of confusion that looks from the outside like nothing happened. The near-term verification is smaller. Start with the old decision and current branch instruction. Add the corrected decision. Then add DFAS receipt and DFAS result. Marcus writes one date on each line and stores the supporting page behind it.
What if no corrected letter has arrived?
He follows the branch's current instruction. Army says the review will take several months. Navy says eligible retirees will be notified. Those aren't deadlines. A polite written status question can document the inquiry when the branch offers a channel, but duplicate submissions can add noise.
Marcus highlights the old date and corrected date instead of refreshing rumor threads. The record tells him what has happened, which agency has the file, and what question is still unanswered.
That is the whole administrative skill. Keep the decision identity and handoff status visible while the government does work you cannot calculate from outside.
Good. One final board. Who waits, who verifies, and who files?
We'll close by matching each unanswered step to its owner. Professor Duran rejoins us for the final decision board: who waits, who verifies, and who files.
3 verbs close this update: wait, verify, file. Use the one that matches the issue, not the one that feels most active.
Wait when your service's verified Soto instruction says the review is automatic or no immediate action is required. For Army awardees, that's the published date review instruction. For Navy's identified population, that's the published records review instruction.
But verify even while you wait.
Yes, verify contact information and preserve the old decision. Compare the corrected effective date when it arrives. Confirm that DFAS received the corrected entitlement information before starting the published 60 to 90-day audit expectation.
That's the acknowledgement we held from the Navy scene. A corrected letter answers what the service decided. A DFAS receipt or status answer tells you whether the pay audit has its inputs. One doesn't prove the other happened on the same day.
What about filing a separate issue?
So file only when a separate issue requires it under your service's current rules. For example, Army says Form 12E is still required to add a new condition. Don't manufacture a Soto application when the service says its review is automatic.
If another service hasn't published the same automatic review detail, ask that service the bounded question and keep the response. Army and Navy evidence can't fill an Air Force or Coast Guard silence.
Which issue though? Wrong effective date or wrong arithmetic? The answer changes who gets the question.
Wrong effective date.
Then ask the service CRSC office because the service owns the entitlement decision. If the corrected date is accepted but the later pay computation appears wrong, ask DFAS for the audit explanation.
But what if the only problem is that 90 days passed from the letter and nobody confirmed DFAS had all information?
Then the 60 to 90-day phrase may have been started from the wrong event. Ask whether DFAS received the complete corrected record and whether the retroactive computation is pending. Complex cases may take longer even after that point.
Here's what I'd actually do. Follow the branch-specific no-action rule, keep both decisions, and wait for proof that DFAS received the correction before starting a timing expectation.
My practical verdict is narrow on purpose. Army and Navy retirees covered by the published Soto reviews should preserve their files, keep contact information current, and let the branch correction reach DFAS before estimating timing. Other service retirees should verify their own service's current process instead of borrowing an instruction.
The rule of 4 from Navy still works. Old date and corrected date, entitlement record, and DFAS audit. I'm not adding a 5th item called Internet Calculator.
A commendable restraint, Fenrir. The straight fact remains, removal of the Barring Act limit opens a longer historical review, but individualized service and pay records determine the result.
Walk away with this. The branch fixes entitlement, DFAS fixes the math. Professor Duran, thank you for keeping each lane separate. We have the legal holding, service correction, and pay audit.
Glad to help. Keep the decision dates and the agency handoff visible, and the next question becomes much easier to route.
If this helped you separate the court ruling from the actual payment path, subscribe and share it with a military retiree who still has an old CRSC letter. Which date in your CRSC file needs an answer? The old service date, the corrected date, or DFAS's receipt date? Keep the letters, track the handoff. Ask the agency that owns the unanswered step. I'll see you next time.